Hi, I'm Scott Mansell and welcome to Driver 61's definitive circuit guide to the Oulton Park International Circuit. Now, Oulton Park is 2.7 miles long with 17 turns, and it happens to be one of my favourite circuits in the UK. This circuit guide is going to go over racing lines, all the bumps and curbs, and all the local knowledge that you need to be quick at the Oulton Park International Circuit. If you're new to Driver 61, I'd just like to let you know that we also have some driving technique tutorials on the driver61.com website and more circuit guides, so please head over to the Driver 61 site and check those out. We also have a race store, so if you need any racewear or motorsports equipment, please head over to the driver61.com store. So here we are on board in the British F3 car of Thomas Randall. Now, Thomas is a very quick racing driver, so he knows the lines perfectly around the Oulton Park circuit. I don't actually have any HD footage of the Oulton Park track, that's why we're using Thomas's onboard footage for today. So here we are on the start-finish line. Just a few things to point out here. Obviously we've got the start lights just on the right-hand side here. So if you're racing, it's good to know where they are. As you can see, the car's positioned in the middle of the circuit here. And it's because we've just come through Deers Leap and the car naturally pushes to the right-hand side. The one thing that you may need to know here is that when you're racing, turn one can be quite a reasonable overtaking opportunity, so you can push the car over to the right hand side here to keep it up against the pit wall, as it's kind of the natural line anyway to protect your position before turn one. But Thomas is in testing here, so we're just keeping the car over to the left hand side on the normal racing line. Now, turn one is a medium high speed right-hander called Old Hall. It's very tricky because as you go in, you always want to turn the car in earlier than you expect. You want to make the curbing, try and make the apex earlier than actually you should do. So it's really difficult here, and it's important to have a good vision as you're coming into Old Hall to be sure that you make the apex at the right point. But before that, we're going to look at some of the braking references. Now, Thomas is in the British F3 car here. Pretty quick in a straight line, but also very quick through the corners and with very late braking points. So we won't use him as a real reference, because if you're on a track day or if you're in a GT car race-wise, then all these braking points will be that little bit too late for you. So on the left-hand side here, we've got the gap in the barrier marked by the orange, and it's quite easy to see this in your peripheral vision. Now, as I always say, with the braking references, we're just using them as a guide. We're not staring at the left-hand side of the circuit here. We need to be actually looking for the apex on the inside. So if you've not seen our tutorial on vision and where to look when you're on the circuit, please take a look at the Drivers University now and look for the vision tutorial, because it really explains exactly where you need to be looking with this really fundamental skill. Anyway, so use the markers on the left-hand side as a reference in your peripheral vision. So we've got the orange on the left hand side, we've got the dirt path here, the access on the left hand side, also as another reference. And if you're super late on the brakes, we've got the turning board just here as well. You can see at the top of the screen here that Thomas is still actually flat out in this British F3 car. Now, as you're coming into the braking zone, we need to be keeping the car in a straight line, as you can obviously see here. One thing that I did want to point out, it's very difficult to see in the video, but just in this area here, where you can see the white line kink just a little bit, there's a dip in the circuit, and you'll really feel that when you're on the brakes. So if you're in a car where you might be braking just after the bump, as Thomas is here in the British F3 car, you actually have to let the car come into the dip and then get on the brakes. If you're braking just before and the car goes through the bump, then it will obviously unsettle the car slightly. So there you go, Thomas is just coming in on the brakes super late, and you can see here, as you're looking towards the inside of the circuit, it's really easy to feel like you should be making the apex somewhere here. But what you have to do is just be patient and turn the car in super gently. Old Hall is a corner where you don't just turn in towards the curb, turn in towards the apex. You actually have to load the car up slowly before you get to the apex, which is further around the corner than you probably think. So if we bring the car a little further into the corner, you can see now that the way that his head is looking is all the way across here, almost where the other car is in this area here. So that's critically important that you're looking a long way ahead. And on the inside of Old Hall here, there are usually 2 bollards. Now, if you're in a GT race or watching the touring cars, you'll see that these bollards get hit and knocked out of the ground very quickly indeed. But normally, they'll have the bollards here on the inside, and that's where we need to be making the apex on the inside. So if we just come back with the video just slightly, very difficult to see here in the video, but you can see them in real life, and you can see that he's still away from the curbing on the inside, but making the apex here. Now, he's not quite made the curb here, and one thing that you'll notice as we go through this Oulton Park circuit guide is that the curbs at Oulton Park are really old school. They're very aggressive, and it can really unsettle the car if you run on them. But we'll go through all the different curbs as we go through each corner. So at Old Hall, you can use a little bit of the curb. I'd say about 50% of the width of the curb. Any more than that, and it's really beginning to get very aggressive, and it could unsettle the car. So then we need to move our eyes up the road looking for the exit point here, and you'll just feel the car naturally push to the outside. The exit here is a little bit similar to the old hairpin at Donington, where the circuit kind of comes back across at an angle. It isn't parallel to how you think you should be coming out the corner. It kind of comes back across, so it can take you by surprise, and it is quite easy to run in here a little bit deep and run on the grass. Now, you can use the curbing here. It is quite aggressive, but you can use it on the outside. But the most important thing on the outside of the corner is that you maintain and keep your car within the track limits. The reason is that there's a pressure sensor on the outside. So if you do run onto this, a picture will be taken of you running beyond the track limits, and you'll get some kind of penalty, even if you're on the track day or in testing. So you can see the sensor in the road just here on the left-hand side. If you do happen to make a mistake on the exit of Old Hall, you can see through the video that all of this section along here is grass crating, so you can run onto it and you won't automatically just slide through the grass. There is a little bit of grip there, but obviously you'll run over the track limits sensor and then you could get a penalty. So once we come out of Old Hall, we're going to be heading downhill towards Cascades, which is a high-speed left-hander. Lots of camber in the road. So at this point, you want to be keeping the car over to the left-hand side of the track. It is quite difficult to see. So if you're new to Oulton Park, this first part, the right, it's flat in almost every car that I've been in. It isn't really a corner. It's just a kink in the straight. But because it's going down the hill, it's a little bit difficult to see exactly where you're going. So you'll need to do a few laps to get the confidence to be flat out through this right-hander. So you can see we're just bringing the car over to the right-hand side there, and it's basically when you first see the glimpse of the curbing on the inside here, that's when you need to turn in gently. You can just see the curb appearing there on the right-hand side. That's when you need to turn in gently towards the curb and the little kink in the straight. So we're then keeping the car over to the right-hand side, but the thing about Cascades is that there's a camber in the middle of the track. The inside lane, as it were, the inside half of the circuit has quite a lot of camber, and then after the midpoint, if you come across, it doesn't have as much camber. So what you need to do is to get the car into the camber, and I'll explain with the video in a second. You can see that Thomas is coming in quite early, and from this point here and across, the circuit has more camber. So you really need to get the car into this section so that it has more grip than if you were on the other half of the circuit. Really important, probably the most important thing about Cascades. Now, Cascades is a quick corner, so in most cars it will be quite a gentle brake, and you'll carry lots of speed in towards the apex. It's a long corner, so you'll need to bring the car in towards the apex really gently. And it's quite difficult to find the apex. It's something that you'll need to do through feel, through experience on the circuit. But as a rule of thumb, and you can't see this when you're turning in, but as a rule of thumb and confirmation, the apex point is somewhere around this gap in the barrier on the left-hand side. Now, if I just take the video back a little while, you'll see that from this point, you can't actually see where the gap in the barrier is. So you'll have to feel where the apex point is at Cascades, but when you get there, you'll be able to confirm at this point, when the orange board on the left hand side flashes past your peripheral vision, you'll be able to confirm that you're on about the right line. Then it's just a case of getting back on the power smoothly at this point. You can see with Thomas's steering angle just here, he's got a little bit of oversteer in the British F3 car. Got it just perfectly rotating. He's flat out on the accelerator, so that's all fine. And he's shifting his vision up to about where this car is, just ahead of him, so he can try and pick out that exit point as we're coming through the exit of Cascades. So another thing to point out here as we're on the apex of Cascades is that just to the right hand side here we've got a gravel trap. There aren't any tarmac runoff zones at Oulton Park. It's all gravel, grass, or unfortunately the tyre wall. So you really do have to be careful. If it's your first time at Oulton Park, you really need to build up, because it is a circuit that if you do make a mistake, it could be very costly. So as we're coming out of Cascades here, we're just letting the car push to the outside, and once you've got back on the throttle, you just need to let the car run to the outside. Again, there's not really an exit marker, just a confirmation once you get there. As you can see just here, just up ahead of where we are now, there's a small patch of concrete which you can use as confirmation that you've kind of come out on the right line. You can't see this from back at the apex, so this corner is really about experience, feeling where you are on the circuit rather than picking out points as references. So now we're heading down a relatively long straight in comparison to the others at Oulton Park. Time to check your mirrors, as Thomas just did then, check your temperatures, anything that you might need to do in the car, but you don't really have that much time before you head into the super fast Island Bend. Now, as we're coming up to Island, single seaters and cars that have aerodynamics, they can just about be flat out through Island. It completely depends on the car, obviously, but GT cars, track day cars, you'll definitely need a decent sized brake as we go into Island. And it's another corner that you'll really need to build up to it, because on the exit there is just grass and then a tyre wall. There isn't anything really there to save you. So if you do make a mistake here, it's a very short trip and quick trip towards the tyre wall. So really build up to it. You've got a few references on the left hand side. Now the trick is here, as you're coming up to Island Bend, you know that you just need to try and carry that little bit more speed in each time until you find the limit. And how you can do this is by using the references as you're coming into the corner and choosing that as to where you brake or where you might just lift off the accelerator. So on the right hand side here, we've got an access road. This one's quite early, but if you're in a big heavy GT car or something that's very quick in a straight line and doesn't corner so quickly, then this could be a very good reference for you. Then we've got another part of the circuit which is a shorter circuit, which is just a hairpin just here. And that's the point where you can see that Thomas is turning into Island Bend, just here. And again, we're not using all of our focus on this reference on the right hand side. We're not looking at it and saying, okay, I need to turn in. No, that isn't the right thing to do. You need to be looking towards the inside of the corner, all the way down here, so you can pick up a few references as to how hard to turn in and where you want to end up, rather than looking at this area on the right hand side. What the area on the right hand side is good for is just a little confirmation of a flash by in your peripheral vision as to know just when to turn in, but your whole focus should be down here in this area of the track. So in the British F3 car, if you just look at the throttle trace up here, it's flat out as we're coming in, and flat out all the way through actually. The curb on the left hand side you really don't want to take too much of. You can see how aggressive the curb points are just here, so you want to stay off that. But you can see that Thomas is making the apex right towards the end of the curb on the left hand side. And again, with Island Bend, it's quite similar to Cascades in the fact that the inside of the circuit has more camber than the outside. You'll feel it, that if you run beyond halfway point of the circuit, you actually feel the change in camber in the way that the car has slightly less grip. So you really want to make sure that you keep your car just on the left-hand half of the track, and you can see that Thomas is doing exactly the same thing here. He's probably got his right wheel somewhere in the middle of the circuit, so he's just on the edge of the extra camber that you have on the left hand side of the track. Now, as we come down to the Shell Oils hairpin, one of the most important things as you come down here is that you get the car straight, get it flat, get the platform flat before you get on the brakes. If you're still turning and you get on the brakes, the braking won't be anywhere near as efficient, and you run the risk of going too deep into the Shell Oils hairpin, not making the corner at all, but you definitely won't be braking as efficiently as you can. So if you do need to restrict the previous island bend corner so that you can get the car's platform flat, get the steering wheel straight before you then get on the brakes for maximum braking efficiency. That's the most important thing here. A lot of people focus on island bend, trying to get through there as quickly as possible, but then it affects the Shell Oils hairpin. So if you can't get through island bend, or it's affecting your braking zone for Shell Oils, restrict yourself or slow yourself down slightly in island bend so that you can get the car straight, get the platform flat, and get on the brakes as efficiently as possible as we're coming into the Shell Oils hairpin. In terms of references, there's a couple. It's not great, to be honest. Again, we've got the orange mark on the left hand side barrier, but once we get beyond that, there isn't much more. So it's another one where you might see the orange flash by, wait a second or two, and then get on the brakes. Now, there are a few bumps as we come down into the braking for the Shell Oils hairpin, so they can work quite well in terms that you feel yourself go over a bump and you know physically where you are on the track, and then you can get on the brakes. When I race here in whatever cars they are, I use a number of these bumps just to go through the bump and then get on the brakes. So you can use it as a physical reference, which often are better than the visual references. So Thomas has got his British F3 car in a flat platform. It's braking as efficiently as possible. And then he's actually darting across to the inside of the hairpin a bit earlier than you might expect. He's not taking the traditional line of being out here, looping around and then getting a really late apex. He's diving down to the inside of the circuit. Now, the reason for this is that you actually cut a few meters off the track length. Obviously, if you drive diagonally across, you're not using as many meters as if you go down, straight down here and then around the outside. But also, the braking distances in this British F3 car are so short that you can turn the car in, get the platform flat, and then just brake in a straight line across the track. So it depends what car you're in. I prefer this line where you dive down to the inside, but it's something that you'll have to practice and try. So if you've got a lap timing delta, like something like the V-Box lap timing delta, you should try a few different laps and see how the delta changes as you come in towards the apex and then exit the corner as well. When you're working with time deltas, you should always take it from just before the braking area to all the way around to just before the next braking area. And that's how you make a fair comparison lap by lap. Anyway, Thomas is coming down to the apex. You can see he's got quite a lot of steering angle in it here. And as we come through the Shell Oils hairpin, there's a lot of camber from about this point here. So what you'll be able to do is probably get off the brakes a lot sooner than you think. You can almost just kind of launch the car into the hairpin, and you come in and it feels really, really quick and it feels like the car's sliding, and it is. But as you come in, the camber then collects you and takes you around the corner. So that's something to bear in mind as you get quicker and quicker around the Oulton Park circuit, is that in this spot particularly, you really need to just get off the brakes quite soon, roll the speed into the corner, and the camber will collect you as you come around. In terms of apex points, it's very difficult. We've got this curb on the inside, which you can just use a little bit of it. It's just a little bit of concrete like this. It's not aggressive, and you can run right on it. But you can see here that Thomas isn't getting right on the inside here. What's actually more important in a hairpin corner is that you're super late on the brakes. If you do run wide by half a metre or a metre, it's no real problem because you'll have saved so much time on the brakes. Rather than being 5 or 10 metres early on the brakes, you're better off running a little bit deep into a hairpin. And you can see now all he's doing is looking all the way around here to try to know when to get back on the accelerator to maximise the exit out of the Shell Oils hairpin. So you can see he's getting back on the throttle, running out wide, and you can see that the exit point again is somewhere near this orange marker on the left hand side. So if we just run the video back just slightly, you can actually see the orange marker all the way around here. You can see it just here on the left hand side. So if you don't exactly know when to get back on the throttle, you can begin to use this orange marker to gauge when you're getting back on the accelerator. Now the curb on the outside of the shell oils hairpin is a fairly standard curb actually. You can run onto it, but with the way that the circuit goes, I don't really know why, but it isn't like you feel like you need to use all of this curb all of the time. You get a reasonable exit actually by not using it. Having said that, if you do come out a little bit wide and you're just hanging onto it, if you do run onto the curb, it's not a massive problem. So we've now got a short straight before we come down to the Britain chicane. It's a very tricky entry. It's a left as you're braking and decelerating the car, and then a right and then another left. And the exit is critical because it goes uphill, and then you've got another medium length straight before you come down to the next chicane. So it's a really tricky and technical part of the circuit, and the curbs are massive, as you'll see in a few moments. So if you do turn in a little bit early, it can be a real car breaker. So we're heading down the short straight now to the Britain chicane, keeping the car over to the left, and then we need to bring the car gently back over to the right hand side. And what's important is that now we're getting the car in a straight line as soon as possible. Much like we did just before the shell oils hairpin, we need to make sure that we've got all the steering done, we've got the car straight so that we can brake as efficiently as possible in a straight line. And if you don't quite understand why we need to have the car in a straight line, take a look at our braking tutorial in the Driver's University, which explains exactly why you need to have the car's platform straight before you get on the brakes. And our tutorial on trail braking, which explains exactly how you need to come off the brake pedal smoothly as you begin to turn the car into the corner. You can find all of those in the Driver's University. So as you can see, we're coming towards the braking zone. Now, if you're in a GT car or road car, you might be braking somewhere back here. So we've got this, I don't really know what it is, we've got this pole on the right hand side here, which you can use as a bit of a reference. And beyond that, to be honest with you, there isn't much. Again, it's the kind of feeling braking zone. You should have your vision down at the apex anyway, but other than the pole that was just on the right hand side of us, there isn't many braking references. We've got the bollards up here on the right hand side, but for most racing cars and track day cars, this is going to be way too late. So yes, you can use that as a reference. As the car's positioned now, for example, you can say that we're probably 10 meters in front of that bollard, so this is where we need to brake. That's probably the best way to use these bollards. So you can see from the telemetry that Thomas is actually getting on the brakes just before the bollards on the right hand side. So that's what he'll be using as his braking reference. So as we head down now into the Britain chicane, you want to be carrying as much speed as you can into this section, and as you go through the left, you can still be getting on the brakes to decelerate for the right hand corner. The left hander isn't the slowest part of this chicane, it's the right hander that's the slowest. So as you turn in here, we get to this point and you might jump over the curb, land, get on the brakes a little bit more before we then turn it into the right and get off the brakes before we get back on the throttle. It's a real rhythmy part of the circuit. You need to bring it into the left, over the curb, on the brakes still, off the brakes and turn it into the right hander. Then you get back on the throttle before you come out of this section. Now, the important part here is that you take a look at this monster curb on the left hand side. Now, we can use most of the curb up to here, and this section, unless you're in a rally car, you really don't want to use any of it because it throws the car over to the right hand side, which then means that you restrict yourself in the right hander, which is the important part because that's where we get on the throttle and we go back up the hill again. So really in this section, you can see here that Thomas is just using that part of the curb, just the first section of the curb, not the second part. Now he is obviously in a very stiff single seater, but you don't want to be using that big part of the curb because it just bounces the car over to the right hand side and restricts the rest of the corner. So you're better off giving up a little bit of time here, not using all that curb, so that you can get this next right hander sorted and get on the throttle early as we go up the hill. You can see at this point he's somewhere in the middle of the track and he probably still on the brakes before he's coming into the right-hander. Now you can see here, because the track's so narrow and it's so tight, it's really important that we're nailing this apex on the right-hand side. Now, a couple of things. You've got these tyre barriers on the right-hand side, which MSV love to use. And to be honest, in my opinion, they're really good that you don't take advantage of the track limits. You're not going to go anywhere near that tyre barrier, so it's good that they put it there as a deterrent for not using too much road. Anyway, the curb is very big on the inside here, so you probably only want to use half of it, and maybe a little bit more if you're in a GT car or a road car, but it's very severe. And at this point, you want to just be carrying as much speed through this right-hander as you can and thinking about getting on the accelerator as soon as possible. Now, we do have a left-hand kink that's coming up, but that corner's flat out. It's not really a corner, you know, it's a kink. So this is the important part, that we get the car settled, we're carrying the speed through the chicane, and we get back on the accelerator as soon as we possibly can. So you can see here now, if you watch Thomas's throttle trace, he's getting back on the accelerator at this point and letting the car run out. Now the limiting factor here is this part of track, okay? If the limiting factor for you is this part of track, you're not carrying enough speed through the previous right-hander, so really think about that. You can see just in this area there's some grass crating where other cars have run onto the grass and worn it away. So you really want to run right up to that white line there. Now the only issue is at this point, if you do just fall onto that grass crating and you've got your left-hand wheel here, as you come back over this curb, aside from it being illegal, so if a marshal sees you, you might get a penalty, but aside from that, when you come back onto the track, you hit this curb on the left-hand side and it really throws the car over to the right. So try to stay away from that if you can. Thomas has done it perfectly. He's run right up to the white line and everything's legal and super quick, as you can see here. So this next section, the left-hander, as we're coming out of Britain chicane, is flat out easily. And then you just need to let the car run over to the right-hand side. Just let the car naturally push all the way over there. We're not needing to use the road, but just free the car up and keep it over to the right-hand side. As you can see, there's a bit of gradient. We're coming uphill here now before we come down to the Hislop chicane and Knickerbrook. Now, if you're racing, this is another area where you might need to defend. So as you've come out onto the right-hand side of the track here, you can just keep the car over to the right-hand side because the next corner's right. So if anyone does get a run on you coming out of the Britain chicane, then they'll have to come to the outside and it's easy for you to defend. Anyway, we're coming up the hill here, coming down to Hislop chicane. You can see Thomas is bringing the car gently over to the left-hand side. And for once, here we have lots of braking references as we're coming into the Hislop chicane. So if we just wind it back a little bit, we've got the 200 metre braking board, and then we've got the 100 metre braking board. And you can see that Thomas is braking just after that. That 100 metre braking board is probably a good braking references for most people in most cars. Yes, we might be braking 20 or 30 metres before it, but at least you can see it. And again, as you're running down here, there's quite a lot of bumps in the track. So again, you can have those physical markers as you're coming down into the Hislop chicane to really give you a good braking reference. So Thomas is on the brakes nice and hard. Again, his vision, as you can see, is looking across at the curbing on the right hand side. So we need to pick that out as soon as we possibly can. So he's picked it out, he's bringing the car in, and again, it's another section of the track. It's easy to find the apex here because the curb is almost like a triangle. It's got a good point to it. So there's no question about where the apex is. And you need to carry a lot of speed into this first part of the chicane. It's much like the Britain chicane. The left-hander there, the right-hander here, you need to carry the speed into it, decelerate just a little bit more before you then go into the right. But on the right-hand side here, we've got, again, that two-stage curb. So use all of the first stage on this side and don't use any of the big sausage curb on the right-hand side. They've really been designed so that we don't cut across the corner. So we're carrying as much speed as we can into this part of the chicane. And as you can see, the positioning here is somewhere in the middle of the road. If you've managed to keep the car over to the right hand side too much here, you've restricted your entry speed. If you're all the way over here, then you've come in too quickly. You want to be somewhere in the middle of the road. You know, the tendency is to go in so quick that we end up all the way over to the left hand side, but then we really restrict the next left-hander. And when you look at the data or whatever acquisition you've got on the car, you'll find that you will have lost time in the left-hander, much more time than you will have gained by coming into the right-hander that little bit quicker. So in most cars, this left-hander will just be a bit of a lift. We generally won't have to get on the brakes. Obviously, it's very car specific, but generally we won't be having to get on the brakes coming into this left. And the apex is really easy to find because, again, they've put one of those small tyre barriers on the left-hand side. Now, this curb on the left here, you can actually take quite a lot of it. It's one of the less rough curbs at Oulton Park, but you do want to obviously be very sure that you don't hit this barrier on the left-hand side. There's actually a stack of three stacks of tyres on the left-hand side there, so you really need to be sure that you don't hit that. Then again, as we're coming through the left-hander, we don't want to use all of the road on the outside here. The reason is that the next right-hander is much more important than this left. So we want to make sure that we can get the car all the way back over to the left before we go through the right-hander to give ourselves the best line through the next right-hander, because it has a flat-out section as you go uphill yet again. So if you're only getting back to the middle of the road at this section here, and the right-hander is becoming an issue and becoming quite tight, you need to restrict the previous left-hander. As you can see, Thomas has managed to get the car all the way back over to the left-hand side. And again, this next right-hander is generally just a bit of a lift as we go in. This section of corners, they're all generally the same speed, so you rarely need to brake. It would just be a lift off the accelerator as we bring the car into the corner to tuck the nose in, get it into the apex before we then get back on the throttle to head up the hill. As you can see, Thomas has got his head turned over to the right hand side, and all he's looking for again is this tyre stack on the inside of Knickerbrook here. So he's bringing the car in. He's actually missed the apex slightly there. You can see he picks up a bit of understeer. If you watch the steering angle, you can see that he turns the car in there and it just gets a little bit of understeer, washes away. It's actually really hard to get to the apex here. It just washes out on that apex, but you can see a definitive point here in the curbing as to where the apex is, not to mention this tyre stack on the right hand side. And you can use quite a lot of the curb on the right hand side here. It's not exactly smooth, but you can get away with using probably half or 3/4 of it if you do make that apex. But obviously be super careful on the right that we don't hit the tyre stack. Then it's just a case of getting on the throttle as soon as we can, because we've got quite a long flat out section coming up next. We can let the car push to the outside here. Again, there isn't really a reference, but you can see in this area here where the grass has been rubbed away, you get confirmation of where everybody's been running and where the exit point is for Knickerbrook. You can see here that the curb on the left, the exit curb, is very aggressive. You'll know about it when you run over it. Now, Thomas has used all of it here. I've been in some classic cars where I've tried not to run on this curb because it feels like it's just destroying the car. It really becomes aggressive like this. So if you just use a quarter, a third or a half, it generally feels okay. But then once you get it up to this section, if you're using all of it where Thomas is now, it really feels very, very aggressive. So now we're heading up Clay Hill towards Druids, which is, in my opinion, the best corner at Oulton Park. It's a double apex, really quick right-hander with a brow on the exit, so it makes for a really exciting part of the circuit. Heading up Clay Hill, this section is quite difficult if you're new to Oulton Park because you can't really see where you're going, and it's important that you just let the car flow as quickly and as well as possible. So as you're coming out of Knickerbrook, we're kind of in the middle of the road. We're looking at where the bridge is just up here, and that's about where we make the inside of the corner there. You can just see that it's just before where the bridge is. So when you're all the way back down here, coming out of Knickerbrook, know that probably 10, 15 meters before we get to the bridge, where the curb is on the left-hand side just here, that's where we need to be making the apex. Then we just let the car naturally push to the outside of the circuit here, keeping it over to the right. And just at this point here where this service road is, again, it's a reference point that we need to use in our peripheral vision, not our focus, just in our peripheral, because we need to be looking all the way down here, and we naturally bring the car over to the left hand side, very smooth with our steering inputs. This part of the circuit is one that you need to build up to because it is difficult to know exactly where the circuit's going as you come through there, and it's so high speed that even a small mistake can cause a massive accident. So we're bringing the car over to the left hand side, and again you can see that there's a curb, but you can't really see it from all the way back here. So as you're bringing it in, you'll be able to confirm that you're on the right line by the fact that there's a curb on the left hand side here. And again, as with some of the other corners that we've spoken about here at Oulton Park, it's important in this section before we get into Druids that you get the car in a straight line that isn't necessarily parallel with the white lines on the circuit. Get it in a straight line, get on the brakes, come off them nice and smoothly, especially here at Druids because we're going so quickly. Come off them nice and smoothly before we bring the car in towards the apex. And again, as I've mentioned a few times here at Oulton, it's one of those feel kind of experience corners in the fact that I can't really give you too much of a reference point because there aren't any. You just need to make sure that you're looking as far forward as you can and that you're picking out the apexes and the curbs on the inside of the circuit. So you can see here that Thomas has spotted that apex. You can just see, you'll be able to see it a little bit better in real life, but the apex is just here where the curb is, and he's bringing the car in nice and smoothly. Now everything that he does with the last little bit of the brake pressure coming off the brakes, and when he gets back on the throttle, will be super smooth here. Now it may be that the car wants to oversteer as you're coming into Druids here. You can improve that by coming off the brakes very, very smooth, and maybe just getting back on the accelerator just a tiny little bit, like 5–10%, just to settle the rear of the car and give the rear a little bit more grip. If you don't understand that and why it may work, just watch our weight transfer tutorial in the Drivers University, which explains how mass and load moves around the car and how it works dynamically, so you can improve your driving on the circuit. So now we're coming into the first part of Druids. You can see that he's made the middle of the curb on the right hand side here, and again Druids has quite a lot of camber on the inside of the corner. If you run out a little bit too wide, you'll feel that the circuit's a little bit dirtier for one, but also that the camber runs out, so it doesn't hold you in the corner quite as well. So it's important that you get down into the apex as Thomas has here, and we're aiming for somewhere in the middle of the curb, if you can see that just as you're entering the corner. Then in the middle section of the corner, we let the car run out to about the middle of the track here. If you're running all the way out here, again it's dirty, we don't have the camber, but you then can't get the car back into the second apex. If you let the car run out so far, you have to turn so much to bring the car back into the second apex that extra steering angle means that you can't carry as much speed through the middle part of the corner. So at this point Thomas is looking all the way up here, looking for the apex point, looking for the curbing on the inside, which again is somewhere in the middle of the curb. And he's brought the car in, missed the apex slightly, and it does depend on what car you're in. Some cars you'll make both apexes, probably more like a GT type of line, but in this single seater with the aerodynamic downforce, he's not needing to make this second part of the apex. It's something that you'll begin to feel as you've done 10 or 20 laps around Oulton Park, exactly where your car should be sitting as you come through Druids. Now the difficult part is the exit. I've seen lots of people making a mistake here because just as you're coming out of the corner, you can't see where the exit point is. If you take a look at the screen now, you can't see from here, you can't see where the exit point is because the circuit comes over a little bit of a crest, so you can't see where the exit point is. That makes the exit extremely difficult, and it can push some people into making a mistake because you can come out a little bit too early, begin to run out of road, and some people lift off the accelerator, which causes the rear of the car to slide. They then go over the crest, which compounds the problem, causes a load of oversteer in the car, and they run off the road and crash into the barriers on the right hand side. So as I mentioned before, be super careful at Druids and all the way around Oulton Park because it doesn't have much runoff. There's lots of bumps, all the undulation and gradient makes it a very challenging circuit. So really make sure that you build up to doing a quick lap around the circuit. So he's letting the car push out, and you can see that the exit point is right on the top of the crest. So he's let the car push out there. He's used a little bit of the curbing there. That's about as much as you'd want to use. Again, it's pretty severe here on the exit of Druids, so try not to use too much. And also, if you're building up, just give yourself that little bit of safety margin so that if you do make a mistake, you've got a bit of track to use. So we've got a good exit coming out of Druids, and now we're heading down to Lodge Corner. Relatively simple actually, right-hander before we head onto the start-finish straight, which actually isn't a straight, it's a big left curve. So we're heading down, some good advertising there for MSV. You can see that the circuit has quite a lot of gradient and bumps, big bumps as we're coming down the straight here. And now luckily for Lodge, we do have quite a few braking references. In terms of, we've got this turning board on the left-hand side here, but after that, there's actually quite a few bumps again in the braking zone. So you get this physical reminder, or this physical reference of where you should be braking and how you might push your braking point that little bit deeper each lap. So you can see here that Thomas has gone way past the turning board and is on the brakes just here. And what will be working for him is that he'll have just gone over a bump, or it will have been 10 meters before. Then he just waits a breath before he then gets on the brakes. And that's how you get on the brakes consistently in the right position each lap. So he's bringing the car into the apex. You can see that the track actually falls away a little bit in this section before we get the car in towards the apex. And again, like with turn one, this is a much slower corner than turn one, second or third gear. But it's really easy to bring the car into the apex too early, and then you end up pushing wide on the exit and getting a really bad exit as you go up the hill to cross the start-finish line. So be patient, be smooth with your turning, especially with your initial steering coming into Lodge, and really think about getting a good exit, because you come up and the gradient of the track's actually quite steep. So it's really important that you get on the throttle and carry that momentum up the hill. As we're bringing the car in towards the apex here, you can see already that there's a couple of bollards. So all the way around here, that's where the apex is, the two bollards on the right-hand side. So bringing the car in towards those, and you can see how far away those bollards are. That's how late the apex is. So you can see why it's easy for you to come into the curb too early, get on the apex or get on your apex too early, and then push out wide on the exit. So you can see he's got that sorted. He's brought the car into the apex right at the end of the curb here. So it's right at the end of the curb and right just after this service road on the right hand side here. You can see that we're on the crest of a hill, and as we come over the crest, it's difficult again to see where the exit point is. So again, it's one of those corners where you need to have quite a lot of experience, build up to it, and really know where the circuit's going. We're just letting the car push to the outside here, and again, you can use quite a lot of the curbing on the outside here. It's a fairly flat curb on the left hand side. What you will notice is that there's another pressure sensor just beyond the curb here, that white line. So if you do run wide here, which is quite easy to do, you'll get picked up by one of the officials and possibly penalised. So just be careful to stay off that pressure sensor on the left hand side. So now it's just a short run up to the start finish line. You can see that we've got quite a lot of gradient in the track here. Now for those of you who are racing, it's a little bit difficult to see it on the video here, but the pit entrance is just up here on the right hand side. So if you're going into the pits on a track day or a test day, or even when you're racing, make sure that you get over to the right hand side as you come through Lodge, so that nobody else can get at the inside of you. You know, if you're in this position where Thomas is in the video now, and you then dart across to come in the pits, may be the case that somebody's on the inside of you and you have an accident as you come across. So just be sure, if you're coming into the pits at race pace, or even on a track day, you can just see it here. Make sure that you're getting over to the right hand side nice and early, so it's very obvious that you're coming into the pits. And then it's just a short run to the start finish line once again. So that's it for our definitive circuit guide to Oulton Park. Thank you very much for watching. Again, if you haven't seen the Drivers University, please take a look at driver61.com/uni for lots of tutorials on driving technique and how to be faster on track. If you're a track day or racing driver, please check out the driver61.com store for all of our motorsport products. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button below and be sure to subscribe to the Driver 61 channel. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.